He thought his lakeside cabin was a peaceful retreat, but one nosy HOA president and a 911 call turned his homecoming into a battle. 6 minutes later, he uncovered a secret that brought the entire HOA crashing down. He had been looking forward to the trip for weeks. The lakeside cabin in Willow Creek, a quiet little community nestled against a shimmering lake in upstate New York, was his sanctuary. It was the kind of place where the air smelled of pine, the water lapped gently against the shore, and the stars seemed brighter than anywhere else. He'd bought the cabin 3 years ago, a modest 2-bedroom retreat with a wraparound porch, as a place to escape the grind of city life. It wasn't much, but it was his. Or so he thought. The trouble started the moment he pulled into the driveway. It was a crisp October afternoon in 2023, and he'd just driven 4 hours from the city, his SUV packed with groceries, a couple of fishing rods, and a duffel bag of clothes for the weekend. The cabin looked just as he'd left it last month, the cedar siding a little weathered, the porch swing creaking slightly in the breeze. But before he could even unload the car, a woman appeared at the edge of his property. She was in her late 50s, with a severe bob haircut and a clipboard clutched to her chest like a shield. This was Karen Mitchell, the president of the Willow Creek Homeowners Association, and she was not happy. He'd met Karen a few times before. She was the kind of person who seemed to thrive on rules, regulations, and the power to enforce them. The HOA was her kingdom, and she ruled it with an iron fist. Every homeowner in Willow Creek had a story about Karen, how she'd fined someone for planting the wrong kind of flowers, or how she'd once measured a neighbor's grass with a ruler to ensure it didn't exceed the maximum height of 3 inches. But he'd always managed to stay under her radar. He didn't live at the cabin full-time, so he paid his HOA dues, kept his property tidy, and avoided trouble. Until now. "You're not supposed to be here," Karen said, her voice sharp as she marched toward his car. She stopped a few feet away, her eyes narrowing as she scribbled something on her clipboard. "This property is under review. You can't just show up unannounced." He was confused. Under review? He owned the cabin outright, and he'd never missed a payment or violated any HOA rules. He stepped out of the car, keys still in hand, and tried to keep his tone polite. "I'm sorry, Karen, I don't know what you're talking about. This is my cabin. I'm here for the weekend." Karen's lips pursed into a thin line. "You didn't submit a request to the HOA for seasonal occupancy. Per Section 4.2 of the bylaws, all part-time residents must notify the board in writing at least 30 days in advance. You're in violation." He blinked, trying to process this. He'd never heard of such a rule, and he'd been coming to the cabin on and off for years without issue. "Karen, I've owned this place for 3 years. I've never had to submit anything to come here. Is this a new rule?" "It's always been the rule," she snapped, though her eyes darted away for a split second, betraying a flicker of uncertainty. "And don't think you can just waltz in here and ignore the regulations. I'm calling the authorities." Before he could respond, she pulled out her phone and dialed 911. He stood there, stunned, as Karen spoke into the phone with exaggerated urgency. "Yes, hello, this is Karen Mitchell, president of the Willow Creek HOA. I'm reporting a trespasser at 47 Lakeside Drive. He's refusing to leave the property, and he's in violation of our bylaws. Please send someone immediately." He couldn't believe what he was hearing. A trespasser? On his own property? He tried to interject, to explain that he was the owner, but Karen held up a hand to silence him, her voice growing louder as she described him as potentially dangerous and non-compliant. When she hung up, she gave him a triumphant smirk. "The police are on their way. You'd better leave now if you know what's good for you." He felt his blood pressure rising, but he forced himself to stay calm. He wasn't about to let Karen bully him off his own property. "Karen, this is ridiculous. I have the deed to this cabin. I'm not trespassing. Let's just wait for the police, and we'll clear this up." Her smirk faltered, but she quickly recovered. "We'll see about that," she said, crossing her arms. "The HOA has authority here, and you're not above the rules." The next 6 minutes were some of the longest of his life. He leaned against his car, arms crossed, watching Karen pace back and forth, occasionally jotting notes on her clipboard. He tried to piece together what was happening. The HOA had always been a minor annoyance, dues, occasional newsletters about community events, but nothing like this. Why was Karen so determined to keep him out? And what did she mean by under review? When the police cruiser pulled up, he felt a mix of relief and anxiety. Two officers stepped out, a man and a woman, both looking mildly annoyed to be dealing with what was clearly not a high-priority call. The male officer, whose name tag read Officer Daniels, approached first. "What's going on here?" he asked, looking between Karen and him. Karen launched into her story before he could get a word in. She claimed he was an unauthorized occupant, that the property was under HOA investigation, and that he was refusing to comply with her orders to leave. She waved her clipboard for emphasis, citing bylaws and regulations with the confidence of a seasoned lawyer. When she finally paused for breath, Officer Daniels turned to him. "Sir, can you tell me your side?" He explained that he owned the cabin, had the deed and all the paperwork to prove it, and had been coming here for years without issue. He mentioned that he'd never heard of this seasonal occupancy rule and suspected Karen was either mistaken or making it up. He offered to show the officers his driver's license and the property documents, which were in the cabin. Officer Daniels nodded. "Let's see the paperwork." Karen's face turned red. "That's not necessary. The HOA has jurisdiction here. This man is in violation, and he needs to leave immediately." The female officer, whose name tag read Officer Patel, raised an eyebrow. "Ma'am, if he owns the property, the HOA doesn't have the authority to bar him from it. Let's see the documents, and we'll sort this out." He led the officers inside, retrieved the deed and a few other documents from a lockbox in the kitchen, and handed them over. Officer Daniels skimmed the papers, then looked at Karen. "This all checks out. He's the legal owner. What's this about an HOA investigation?" Karen sputtered, clutching her clipboard tighter. "The property is under review for non-compliance. He didn't submit the proper forms, and the HOA board has the right to." Officer Patel cut her off. "Ma'am, an HOA can't override property ownership. If he's the owner, he has every right to be here. What exactly is this review about?" That's when things got interesting. Karen's confidence started to crack. She stammered something about community standards and pending board approval, but it was clear she was grasping at straws. He seized the opportunity to press her. "Karen, what's this review really about? I've never heard of it, and I've been paying my dues on time. If there's an issue, I have a right to know." Karen's eyes dotted too. Karen clutched the folder to her chest. "None of your business," she snapped, but her voice wavered. Officer Daniels, sensing something was off, asked to see the folder. Karen hesitated, then reluctantly handed it over, muttering about confidential HOA matters. The officer opened it, and his expression changed. He handed it to Officer Patel, who scanned the contents and let out a low whistle. "Sir," Officer Patel said, turning to him, "you might want to take a look at this." The folder contained a proposal from a real estate development company, Lakeview Partners, to purchase several properties in Willow Creek, including his. The plan was to demolish the cabins and build a luxury resort, complete with a golf course and a marina. The HOA, led by Karen, had apparently been working with the developers to pressure owners into selling. The review Karen mentioned was a pretext to declare certain properties non-compliant, so the HOA could seize them through a loophole in the bylaws and sell them to the developer. He felt his stomach drop. His cabin, his retreat, was just a pawn in some shady deal. And Karen had called the police to intimidate him into leaving before he could figure it out. Officer Daniels looked at Karen. "Ma'am, this doesn't look good. You can't use an HOA to force someone off their property or coerce them into selling. That's not how it works." Karen's face went pale. I was just following the board's instructions," she stammered. "This is for the good of the community." He wasn't buying it. He asked the officers if he could keep the folder, and they agreed, noting that it might be evidence if he decided to pursue legal action. Karen tried to protest, but Officer Patel shut her down. "Ma'am, I suggest you go home. We'll be following up with the HOA board about this." As Karen slunk away, tail between her legs, he felt a surge of determination. This wasn't just about his cabin anymore. The entire HOA was rotten, and he wasn't going to let them get away with it. Over the next few hours, he dug deeper. He called a lawyer friend in the city, who confirmed that what the HOA was doing was not only unethical but likely illegal. The development proposal relied on a clause in the HOA bylaws that allowed the board to seize properties deemed non-compliant after a review process. But the clause was vague, and the review process was supposed to involve a vote by all homeowners, not just the board. Karen and her cronies had been bypassing that step, targeting part-time residents like him who weren't around to notice. He also reached out to other homeowners in Willow Creek. Most were full-time residents who'd been kept in the dark about the development deal. When he showed them the proposal, they were furious. The idea of their quiet lakeside community being turned into a sprawling resort was unthinkable. By the end of the night, he'd organized an emergency meeting at the community center for the next morning. The meeting was chaotic. Over 50 homeowners showed up, many clutching copies of the development proposal he'd emailed them. Karen and the rest of the HOA board were there, looking like they'd rather be anywhere else. Karen tried to take control, insisting that the resort would elevate property values and benefit the community, but the crowd wasn't having it. One homeowner, a retired accountant named Tom, pointed out that the HOA's financial records showed large payments to Lakeview partners, labeled as consulting fees. Another homeowner, a former real estate agent, noted that the proposed sale prices for their properties were well below market value. The room erupted in shouts and accusations. Karen tried to deflect, claiming she was just exploring options, but the evidence was damning. He stood up and laid out everything he'd learned, the fake reviews, the secret meetings with the developer, the 911 call to intimidate him. He proposed a vote to dissolve the HOA entirely, arguing that it had lost all credibility and was being used to exploit rather than protect the community. Under New York law, an HOA could be dissolved with a 2/3 vote of the homeowners, provided there were no outstanding debts or legal obligations. Tom, the accountant, confirmed that the HOA's finances were clean aside from the suspicious payments to the developer. The vote was swift and decisive. 48 out of 52 homeowners voted to dissolve the HOA. Karen and her allies were outvoted and outmaneuvered. By noon, the HOA was officially disbanded. The community agreed to form a new, voluntary association to handle basic maintenance like road repairs, but it would have no authority over individual properties. The development deal was dead in the water. Lakeview partners backed out when they realized the community was united against them. Karen didn't go quietly. She sent a flurry of angry emails, threatening legal action and claiming the vote was invalid. But without the HOA's backing, she had no leverage. A few weeks later, she sold her own cabin and left Willow Creek. Rumor had it she'd moved to a gated community in Florida, where she was already causing trouble for her new neighbors. He spent the rest of the weekend at his cabin, fishing on the lake and sipping coffee on the porch. For the first time in years, Willow Creek felt like a true community again. The stars were brighter, the air was sweeter, and the threat of Karen's clipboard was gone for good. But he didn't let his guard down. He kept the development proposal and started working with his lawyer to ensure no one could pull a stunt like that again. He also became the unofficial leader of the new association, making sure it stayed transparent and accountable. The cabin was his sanctuary once more, and he was determined to keep it that way. The 911 call that was meant to scare him off had backfired spectacularly. In just 6 minutes, Karen's overreach had exposed her scheme and set the stage for the HOA's downfall. It was a lesson in standing your ground, and a reminder that even the most powerful clipboard couldn't stand up to the truth.